All right, here we go. Greg Kading, welcome back.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
You were on here before. And, for those that didn't see the first piece, remind everyone what your role was in the whole, Tupac and Biggie investigations.
Okay, so I was an LAPD detective. I was actually working in our narcotics bureau at the time that I was recruited to come and take a new look at the Christopher Wallace murder investigation. So this was in 2006, and the city was facing a lawsuit regarding that murder investigation. So I got recruited in to work in our robbery homicide division, and then from that we developed a task force that began to take a new look at all of the old claims.
Right, and how long did you work on it altogether?
Just over 3 years, from
Okay.
2006 to 2009.
And it ultimately ended with no convictions.
Correct.
Right. Which was very frustrating on your end.
Yeah. To this day.
To this day. Well, at least you got to get the whole story out.
Yeah.
On a lot of different platforms.
Yeah, and that's been really satisfying.
Yeah.
Being part of this conversation, since I retired in 2010, but for the last 9 years, just immersing myself in the conversation with the international collection of fans and people that care and want to know what happened.
So before we met last time, Murder Rap, your documentary, hadn't come out yet.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So that came out and, shook a lot of things up.
Yeah. Mike did a really good job with that. Obviously it was based on the book, Murder Rap, but Mike Dorsey, the producer of that project, did a really great job, I think, of getting the, using that platform, to speak to an audience that's not going to go buy a book and read it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, very well put together, very detailed. Definitely one of the best documentaries about that subject, if not the best, because you really kind of broke down a lot of things, and a lot of documentaries came out afterwards, which I didn't think were very good, like the one with like Ice-T and so forth.
Yeah.
I just thought was sort of thrown together, it didn't really bring a lot of new information to it.
Yeah.
But then after that, the Unsolved series came out, and that was essentially based on your story.
Yeah, I collaborated with the creator of that series, a guy named Kyle Long, and he had approached me and he had watched the documentary, and he was always fascinated with the case. So we got together and we kind of agreed to work together on the scripted series. USA picked it up, aired it, and now I think it airs on Netflix next week or in 2
really?
weeks. Yeah, it's coming to Netflix in
Great.
a couple weeks.
I could rewatch it then.
Yeah.
Hell of a series. How many parts was it altogether?
10.
10 parts, right.
Yeah.
They really went. Yeah, and each part was relatively long, right?
Yeah, so you got 10 hours of
Yeah.
coverage, essentially.
10 hours on that whole story. Yeah, pretty incredible. And, we were talking about this before we ran the cameras. There was a high level of detail in those scenes. Like, I remember you and I talked about how when you guys approached Keefe D, it was at his house in the garage. Yeah. And I'm watching the series, and sure enough, Keefe's in his garage, and your character comes in, and it was like, oh shit, like they really went above and beyond.
I'm always surprised because, like the writers, everybody found that to be such a fascinating scenario. And I was just like, we just went to the guy's house and we went in the garage and the door closed and it was kind of weird. And but when I retell the story, people are like, wow, what an incredible moment. And so it's and the creators and the writers and the producers and everybody on Unsolved really committed to trying to get this as historically accurate as they could. Of course, it's made for entertainment, so they've got to take some creative license. But they were really committed to trying to get the story historically correct.
Yeah, I mean, that's better than some movies, honestly.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it was very well done.
I appreciate that.
Now, there was supposed to be a movie that was supposed to come out called City of Lies, which Johnny Depp was involved in,
correct.
But that was scrapped.
Yeah, I was just kind of hearing through the rumor mill that it had problems from the onset. And of course, it never really came to fruition as expected, and I don't know all the details of it, but quite frankly, I'm not surprised. I mean...
Were you involved in that at all?
No, not at all.
Not at all. Okay. Well, that movie was based on Russell Poole's investigation, right?
Correct.
Did you know Russell Poole?
Not personally. You know, I only knew him through his work, and specifically through his work on the Biggie Smalls investigation. You know, we'd never crossed paths on the job. From what I understand, he is a pretty good detective in his day, but I only knew him through evaluating his work as it pertained to Biggie's case.
Well, I guess during the course of him doing this investigation, he had a heart attack and died.
So that happened post-street. You know, he left the job, went and became, you know, kind of like a marshal over at the federal courthouses in L.A. His life seemed to kind of spiral downhill. You know, he went through some financial problems, family problems, drinking problems, that type of thing. But then he kind of got a second wind and was trying to look into some late claims, like 2015 claims that he wanted to try to track down. And in the pursuit of that, I think the stress caught up to him, health caught up to him, and he was in an interview over at the LA County Sheriff's Homicide Bureau, and he just seized up.
And just died right there, huh?
Right there.
And even in a police department, they couldn't get an ambulance fast enough, or?
Well, I mean, when you have a heart attack and you die, it's pretty immediately under those circumstances. Of course, life-saving efforts were employed, but CPR was employed, the ambulance got there, but it was just his time.
Yeah, I think Busta Rhymes made a comment, I guess, on social media, basically saying that it's a conspiracy theory. He felt like,
Of course,
you know, right when Poole started to, you know, address his cold case, you know, about Biggie's death, he just died. And he said, oh, ain't that some shit?
Yeah. Let's set him up at the police. Let's kill him here. That makes so much sense. Bring him into an interview room at the police department.
And kill him there.
Yeah, fun, yeah.
I mean, when it comes to Tupac and Biggie, there's no shortage of incredible conspiracy theories involving the highest levels of power in the world and so forth. You know, like just recently, Suge's son is saying he has Tupac in the studio and all types of interesting shit. But it is what it is.
Yeah, unfortunately, none of these conspiracy theories ever come to fruition. At some point in time, you just realize that wishful thinking is not going to get you anywhere.
Well, recently we had Mob James on here, and you know, from Mob Piru. He was essentially, you know, the head of Suge's street security.
Right.
You know, at one point, and he was running with Suge for a while. Knew him since high school, but then was running with him through the process of extorting Vanilla Ice, and you know, through the whole Eazy-E stuff and everything else like that. And we were just talking about the beef between Suge and Puffy. And what he explained to me was that before Tupac even got out of jail, Suge had a problem with Puffy. Are you aware of this?
Yeah, but the account I heard was through Reggie Wright Jr. About that beef, and I'm not sure if that's the same one that Mob James is talking about, but you know, there was some interest in having Biggie perform at a location, you know, that Suge Knight was promoting, and Puffy wanted half the door, and so there was just it started out as kind of just a money beef.
Oh, really? So that was the original beef?
Yeah, according to Reggie Wright Jr.
Okay. I mean, the way Mob James explained it was that
it was a power move for Suge. Suge was already beefing before Tupac. This wasn't just Tupac and Biggie. Suge was trying to get at Puffy and try to bully him like he was bullying everybody else.
Right, because some of Puffy's associated artists were now, you know, coming to death row, like Jodeci.
Yeah,
like Mary J. Blige.
All of them was Mary J. Blige. Suge's supposed to went to the people who wasn't paying her right and helped her out of her situation. Him and Puffy was at it before Tupac even touched ground in L.A. And I think Puffy just wasn't biting into the shit. We lost a homeboy, Big Jake, out there. Got killed in the shooting. You know what I'm saying? Suge came home. How in the fuck is that? You know what I'm saying? He's out there riding with you, taking care of business. Suge was in some shady shit, doing too much, and trying to flex. And he didn't have his bodyguards like he normally have. So he was out there thinking people is like really scared of him now. He couldn't take advantage of that this time.
Then Tupac gets out. And the whole death row bad boy beef is in full swing.
Right.
What starts to happen between those two camps? What starts to happen in terms of the Puffy side during this time?
Well, you know, the music and the lyrics are kind of insinuating some of the beef, and that begins to exacerbate itself when they would come into contact with one another. They'd run into each other, and there would be these, you know, conflicts, and it just began. It was just, stoking a fire that had already been lit and just continued to grow out of control. Jake gets killed in Atlanta.
Right.
You know, that's really the first blood on the ground.
Right, and that was Suge's close friend.
Correct. Yeah.
So Jake gets killed, and I guess Suge kind of blames Puffy for it in some regard?
Yeah, because the guy who kills Jake is from Puffy's camp, and so yeah, he holds him responsible for it.
Okay, so who killed Jake?
The consensus is it's an unsolved case, but the consensus is, and by Georgia PD, Atlanta PD, a guy named Wolf, Anthony Jones.
Wolf.
That was kind of a, you know, he was to Puffy Combs what Buntry was to Suge.
Right. Wolf is kind of these figures that you've heard a lot about.
Right.
That was basically Puff's main muscle. And Wolf is dead now, actually.
Right.
He actually got into an altercation with BMF years later, and he got killed during that altercation.
That's right.
So now Jake is dead, and the beef is in full swing.
Mm-hmm.
Now you had said at one point that that Puffy approached the South Side Crips.
Yeah, so really what happened, the beef's in full swing, as you said, and then Puffy realizes that it's dangerous to come out here to Los Angeles, especially after what happened in Atlanta, and knowing that Suge's kind of holding him responsible for that. So he wants to come out here, he wants to promote his music, he wants to be able to kind of, you know, run the streets and make connections, but he knows that with Suge out here, it's going to be hard to do. So he goes through an intermediary who he already knows has a good relationship with the South Side Crips, and that's a guy named Eric Martin, Equan Williams, street name Zip, Harlem cat, and he had a close relationship with Puffy. He was a friend of Puffy's dad, and he was a drug dealer and was getting his dope out here from a guy named Keefe D. I'm sorry, he was getting his dope from a guy out here named Keefe D. And you know, Zip's like, hey, I can hook you up with some muscle out there. People can look out for you and protect you from Suge.
Okay, Zip's still alive?
No, he died. He died of cancer.
Okay. So you say that Puffy ended up hooking up with Keefe D and the South Side Crips,
Correct.
who are from Compton.
Right.
Okay. And how did that relationship develop?
Well, it was a drug relationship to begin with. So Keefe D was supplying PCP and cocaine from the West Coast to Zip on the East Coast in New York. So initially that was the relationship. But Zip had this, you know, pre-established relationship with Puffy Combs because of his friendship with Puffy's dad. And so that's how that connection was made. But it started out as a drug relationship. And of course Zip, in having conversations with Keefe D, would have known that Keefe D knew Suge personally, that they kind of came up together. One became a Blood, one became a Crip, but they were childhood associates. And so it was just a kind of an easy connection between it all.
Okay. And what were the South Side Crips doing for Puffy initially?
Really just kind of being an entourage that could keep an eye out for any of Suge's goons. So he'd go to the, video shoots, go to the clubs, whatever it is. You just have this element there of people that can take matters into their own hands and protect you from the likes of Suge Knight and the people that he had in his inner circle.
Okay, so were the South Side Crips actually doing anything? Did anything physically happen around that?
Yeah, there was some confrontations, some gunplay, that type of thing. None of it ever culminated into straight out violence unless you believe the story which I happen to, at this point anyways, is that Keefe D's nephew, Orlando Anderson, the one we now all know shot Tupac, was out in Atlanta and part of that entourage of people that shot and killed Jake. So if that story's true, he was positively identified, Orlando Anderson was, by the best eyewitness out there, and said that if that in fact is true, then early on you've got Orlando Anderson in the middle of this confrontation where Suge's best friend gets killed.
Okay, and I guess didn't Keefe say that Puffy used like his 6'4" Impala or something in a Usher video shoot? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for reminding me. So that there was that kind of business connection. So he used his Impala, and it's in the Usher video. You can see it, and I guess there was some damage done to it. And so, of course, Puffy had to make that right because he doesn't want to give this gangster back his Impala with a bunch of dents and scratches in it. So, it was just kind of, I think at that point in time, this mutual respect. Keefe D and his crew, they're these kids from Compton, and they want to be in this, party environment of, the girls, the drugs, the whole thing. So, of course, they're going to do whatever they need to do to maintain that relationship.
So as this is escalating, Suge is trying to get at Puffy's people.
Right. So as it's escalating, Suge's obviously openly recruiting people from Bad Boy to come to death row. So that's an affront to Puffy, obviously. Plus, there's talk about Suge Knight trying to expand death row, from death row west to death row east, out onto the East Coast, and vice versa. So now they're kind of encroaching on each other's territory. And so you can see how it becomes a threat to both of them.
Well, I guess there was one guy who got beat up who claimed that Suge was trying to find out where Puffy lived and where Puffy's mother lived and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a guy named, Mark Bell. Mark Bell was at a Christmas party. He is an A&R guy from the East Coast, had a relationship with Puffy, and was also trying to get some work out here. He gets invited to a death row Christmas party, and at that death row Christmas party, he gets accosted, taken upstairs, beaten up, and all in this effort for Suge to find out where Puffy stayed out here when he was on the West Coast, where his West Coast home was, and where his family stayed. And so, of course, word got back to Puffy that Suge was taking those measures, going to that extreme to try to find out where his home was. And that's going to put you on your heels.
Right. So you said at that point, Puffy really got scared.
Yeah, according to Keefe D and all the other sources that were talking about that situation, yeah, Puffy was worried about it, really in fear for his life.
So what did Puffy do in regards to that?
So that's when Puffy really needs to know, he needs to reach out and secure this security force, i.e. the South Side Crips, to come around and help him feel safe when he's out here on the streets.
You've actually said there was a story about a hit.
Right.
Okay. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so there's, Keefe D claims that there is this ongoing conversation. It happens on 3 different occasions, but most specifically when he and Puffy are at this place called Greenblatt's Deli on Sunset. And they're there. Things have spiraled out of control. Puffy's really concerned about, the welfare of his safety. And he tells Keefe D, man, I just need you to take care of this situation with Suge and Tupac. It's out of control. Tupac's on vinyl talking about killing all of our kids when they grow up, and it's just become this really serious conflict. And he says, I just need you to take care of him. And Keefe D's like, that's no problem. That's what we do. And so an agreement was made, according to Keefe D, for an amount of money, and they kind of just let it go at that point in time. But of course, Keefe D knows in the back of his mind this is what Puffy wants done, and they all end up out in Las Vegas. Suge's out there.
Before you say that, there's a couple things I want to talk about.
Sure.
For Vegas. So when you say that Keefe got offered an amount of money, according to him, was there a dollar amount?
Yeah, so there was a dollar amount. But I think that, you know, the nuances of this conversation are that, like, man, I'll give you $1 million, whatever it takes. You know, it's like exaggerated speech. But of course, when we interview Keefe D, he's like, yeah, that's what the agreed amount was, $1 million.
So according to Keefe, he's claiming that Puffy offered him $1 million to kill Suge or Tupac?
Both
or
of them.
both.
Yeah, both their names came up. And according to Keefe D, he says, you know, Tupac's put himself on the list by all the shit talking that he was doing. But it was really about Suge, because it was Suge's muscle that Puffy was afraid of. He was afraid of what Suge could do with the people that, the likes of a Buntry. You know, those are serious guys.
You know, from your point of view as a police officer, a former police officer, does this constitute a hit, or is it just a person who's scared? It was like, yo, I'll do whatever it takes, just get rid of these guys, and I don't want to know about it.
That's a great question. I mean, there's certainly a solicitation, and there's an agreement, and so that's what constitutes solicitation for murder, and which, you know, is a crime. But I also understand the nuances of Puffy's fear, you know, and is he just speaking out his ass? Is it exaggerated speech? Whatever. But the conflict was real. It was a life or death game that was going on between these guys. So for Keefe D, who understands that as well as anybody, he understands it as a true solicitation for murder.
Okay. Now, Mob James, as well as other people, like, you know, some of the Outlaws, I think Napoleon from the Outlaws said it, and possibly some other members, there was an overall understanding that there was a 10K bounty on Death Row Chains that came from Puffy.
Word was on the streets that Puffy and Bad Boy was doing a video, and they was paying anyone to bring back a Death Row chain. So Pac looked at it like, this is deeper than Bloods and Crips. This is my enemies. You know, Puffy and them attacking us now because I'm with Death Row. So words on the street that if you bring back this Death Row chain so we can put in our video, this was the words on the street.
Right. Yeah.
You know, like when I asked Bob James, he said there was. Like, he said it very confidently. There was bounties on Death Row chains.
Yeah.
10,000, I think?
$10,000.
Right. Your mom had a Death Row chain.
She had a little bitty one.
Right.
Yeah. Well, they were snatching those.
Right, and there was no doubt this understanding that there was a bounty. We've never been able to track that down to a source where said I was there when an agreement was made, but that was the understanding on the street and among these people, was that there was a bounty for the chain. And of course we see that becomes real at the Lakewood Mall when Orlando Anderson tries to snatch Trayvon Lane's chain.
Right. So a fight happens in the mall, and they try to take Trayvon Lane's chain, who's affiliated with Mob Piru and Death Row.
Right.
But I guess they don't actually take the chain.
Yeah, I think they do take it. They get it off of him, but then during the Donnybrook whatever, he gets it back. He claims he got it back, and so there's no reason to believe he didn't. We never found that chain, at Orlando Anderson's house or anything like that. But certainly, if it wasn't an attempt, then they did actually secure it and then lost it back to Trayvon Lane. And it's important to remember that this Trayvon Lane is the person directly, aside Tupac Shakur when they confront Orlando Anderson again in Las Vegas.
Right. And Trayvon Lane, Orlando Anderson is Keefe D's nephew.
Correct.
So now you have one person in the car that's still alive, Keefe D.
That's it.
The Keefe D tapes get released.
Correct.
And then the Murder Rap documentary comes out.
Right.
Originally, when Keefe D did the confession, did he assume that this would be like sealed up and never see the light of day?
Absolutely. I believe that was his mindset, is that it would never come out.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it comes out.
And I doubt that he even knew that it was recorded. He probably was unaware of the fact that it was being recorded.
Oh, so there wasn't a tape recorder right there when... No. Oh, it was like a hidden recorder?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
So he was being secretly recorded by the police while giving his confession?
Yeah.
Okay, and that's legal?
Oh, absolutely. all day long.
All day long.
Yeah, when you go into a police interview room, you better expect that there's a recording going on. And you're not going to see the recorder, but it's...
Oh,
you know,
wow. Oh, that's
yeah.
how it's done these days.
Watch any crime documentary, and you're sitting there watching videotape of a guy being interviewed, and that guy doesn't necessarily know that there's a videotape on.
Okay. Was he videotaped or just audio recorded?
Just audio recorded. Yeah, because we did it wasn't at the police station. We actually did the interviews at his lawyer's office.
And you guys just had tape recorders on you? I mean, recording
Yeah,
equipment on you?
small little concealable recorders.
Got it. Mm-hmm. These tapes come out. Mm-hmm. Well, you actually, before releasing these tapes, you actually go and meet up with Keefe D.
Right.
How did that conversation go?
As expected, you know, I knew that we needed to kind of be really direct with him, let him know that what he was facing as far as the case we built against him, and to give him the option of cooperating. You know, my objective throughout this whole thing was not to put a drug case on Keefe D. My objective through this whole thing was to solve the murder of Tupac and Biggie. And so, but that was a device or a tool that we used in order to, you know, to accomplish that objective. So we go, Keefe D, here's the deal. We've been listening to your phones, we've been tracking you, we've got intercepting drugs, we're intercepting money, we have informants, we have an airtight case against you. You need to call your attorney and come meet with us and have a conversation. So that afternoon, we all end up in Los Angeles. He has his attorney, we're at the U.S. Attorney's office, sit down, the prosecuting attorney, Tim Seawright, Keefe's attorney, Wayne Higgins. They compare notes, and Keefe D and his attorney go off and have a conversation. They come back and say Keefe D wants to cooperate, so let's start scheduling interviews.
Right, but what I'm saying is fast forward however many years, you actually tell Keefe D, you meet with Keefe D and say, I'm about to release these tapes.
Oh, yes, sir. I'm sorry. Yeah, so before, right when I was publishing the book, I didn't tell him I was going to come out with the tapes. I just told him I was publishing a book based on the investigation, including his confession. And so I tell him that. We're sitting in my truck. We're down in front of his house in Corona, California. I was like, here's the deal, Keefe D. You know, I'm retired. I'm going to release a book. It's going to detail everything that happened in the investigation, including what you had to say. I just want to give you a heads up, because who knows, you know, what the consequences of all this will be. And he says, hey, bring it on. I'm a gangster. I can deal with this shit.
Were you armed when you went to go meet with Keefe D to tell him this?
Probably. I don't
Okay.
specifically remember, but I was always really kind of complacent about that. Sometimes I had guns, sometimes I didn't. Like when we were in his garage that one day initially when we first confronted him, I didn't have a gun on me. Thankfully, my partner did.
Okay.
But, you know, just I didn't do police work that way. It's really low-key, which is not the way you should be doing it, by the way.
I mean, there was no fear of like, hey, when I tell this guy that I'm about to release these tapes, he might try to kill me?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm smart enough to recognize that that's a possibility. Yeah, I probably had a gun. I may have had one, you know, under the, who knows? I don't remember, to be honest with you. But certainly, I'm aware of what he's capable of. But I also understand that we've built a rapport. You know, I've interviewed him, and there's, to some degree, a mutual, respect. And, you know, is he going to really just pull out a gun and shoot a guy in front of his house who's a retired cop and bring all of those problems upon himself?
So these tapes come out, and now there wasn't any sort of gray area or conspiracy theory talk when it came around that. It was, you know, it was like, okay, that's Keefe D. Like I've interviewed people who knew Keefe D,
Right.
you know, and I played them the tape, and they're like, that's Keefe D.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that's someone else on tape. This whole thing is a Hollywood production used to sell books. It was established across the board that this is Keefe D confessing to all this.
Most certainly.
Did you speak to Keefe D after the tapes were released?
No.
No. I've spoken to him actually a couple times.
Yeah. I guess a number of people have.
Yeah.
Clearly, he would not trust having a conversation with me anymore because he knows I'm going to tape it and release it.
Right.
So yeah, but you know, he's become vocal about it. He's not running and hiding from what he said.
It's funny because I get accused of being the police and everything else like that, and I explain to people that, when you do an interview with me, you're wearing a wire that you put on yourself.
Right.
You run it under your own
Yeah.
shirt, and there's another one pointing at you right now.
Right.
And there's 2 video cameras pointing at you. There's no gray area on whether or not you're being taped or not.
Exactly.
You, on the other hand, are actually taping conversations secretly.
Yeah, which is standard procedures in law enforcement. There's no expectation, and now here it's clear, you've got cameras, you know what's going on.
Yeah.
But in the law enforcement environment, in the police environment, you don't have an expectation of privacy. You know that you're being investigated, you know that it's for a reason, and you know they're going to use that information if they can.
Yeah.
So there's no expectation of privacy, which allows us to secretly record, legally.
So then with Suge, he ends up losing death row.
Correct.
The way Reggie described it was,
A default judgment is what caused them to have to file bankruptcy. Not that Harry O was correct or the judge, they went through a trial or anything like that.
he didn't show up to
He
trial.
just didn't show up.
So then Suge is, goes back to being Suge, trying to shake people down and causing various problems. He gets involved in 2 other criminal investigations. Mm-hmm. One of which I guess he threatened F. Gary Gray, who directed Friday and then went later on to direct Straight Outta Compton.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was a situation with Cat Williams and a woman and a camera.
Correct.
And I guess both of those were felonies or potential felonies?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Terrorist threats against Gary Gray, and then the robbery.
Yeah. And then the whole Tams parking lot situation happened. You weren't involved in those cases at all.
No.
You just monitored them,
Right.
just like everybody else.
Sure.
Suge Knight ends up getting beat up by Bone, and then hitting Bone, and then driving forward and killing Terry. Mm-hmm. I talked to a bunch of people, both on the law enforcement side and the hip hop side and the gangster side. And everyone wasn't quite sure what was going to happen, but a lot of people, including myself, said he might get off with self-defense. Or
I was one of those people.
Possibly manslaughter or something of the sort of like, hey, somebody just beat you up. You're scared for your life. You think there might be a gun.
Right.
You're in a dangerous situation. Somebody gets killed who you don't have a problem with, who's actually your friend who you came to that place with. So you don't have a beef with this guy. You might actually get off or just get some time served and keep it moving. But Reggie Wright explained it to me that
Spoke to him once after the plea, and what he pretty much explained or said was he would have had to win 6 times to not get life in jail.
win 6 times because there were 6 different charges.
It was 3 different charges, but he would have had to beat those twice because they would have kept retrying him.
Right. So there's that. There's other things contributing to that whole thing. Suge's his own worst enemy. He was, to a large degree, created that, or instigated that confrontation between him and Bone. And though, yeah, he probably didn't intend to run anybody over. He does have some vision problems. He sees what he believes is a gun, but clearly it was a radio of Bone's that fell out of his waistband. But Suge, finds himself, but he leaves the scene of the crime, and he goes and finds his lawyer and tries to figure out how to fix this thing. Suge's real problems became during the process before trial, when he's on the phones and he's using his attorneys to coerce and try to obstruct justice. And that was all going to come out in trial, and Suge knew that.
Right, yeah, because
So-
I guess, 2 of his lawyers got caught up in,
His lawyers and his wife.
got caught in the lawyers got caught up in witness tampering, I guess.
Right.
Didn't one of them lose their license or something of the sort?
As did the wife.
The wife, I guess she sold the tape to TMZ
Yeah.
and then violated her probation on that. Oh, so all those situations, all that bullshit that...
It's all going to come up in trial. So, and those are new charges. It's compounding an already bad situation.
Were those
for
charged
him.
against him or against other people?
All
Or
of
against
them.
so
for sure
he's
should,
included
yeah.
in all that.
Absolutely.
So had he not done that, he could have potentially gotten a much lower plea deal?
It'd have been better for him. Yeah, he knew that facing all of that stuff was going to come out in trial, and he's going to look terrible, and he's probably going to lose, and you're going to be able to paint a pretty bad picture of Suge Knight in front of a jury, historically, and all this stuff's going to come in as far as what took place in the murder. So I'm sorry, in the the manslaughter, technically. Suge, I think, is just tired.
Yeah. Well, TreWay, who is a Long Beach Crip, who's a regular on the show, the way he explained it to me also was that there's a very big difference to getting a actual number for a prison sentence versus getting and life. Mm-hmm. He said that he knows people that got 3 years to life and 25 years later they're still locked up.
Yeah.
And especially with someone like a Suge, even if he got 10 to life, it would just be, every time he would go up to the parole board, it'd be like rejected.
Right.
Is that probably
Yeah.
what would have happened?
Probably, yeah. You don't think that Suge's going to be a model inmate. There's going to be problems for Suge. And so going to before a parole board and stuff is probably going to, it's going to take a long time before you convince them that you can come out and be a productive member of society. So I think Suge and his lawyers just realized, plus it's expensive to defend yourself, if you're going to have a good defense.
Yeah, and Suge is ultimately broke at this point.
Yeah, so all those things played a part in his decision to just take the 28 years. And again, like I said before, you cut that in half and give him time served.
You think he's going to get 14 years served?
Yeah, I'd say
Because
probably
it's a state case?
Yeah. Yeah,
So he can get out 2030 something?
potentially, yeah.
Potentially? Yeah. Well, I think you've said that the biggest reason why the Tupac murder was never solved was because Suge refused to cooperate.
Initially. I think that had Suge and other members of his entourage, if they'd all been forthright and not wanted to take the matter into their own hands and handle it on the streets, yeah, absolutely. Tupac's case should have and could have been resolved really quick. Everybody knew it was Orlando. It was just getting the evidence to support that knowledge. And, Suge Knight could have said, oh yeah, I looked right over. I seen Keefe D in the car. We had eye contact. I've known him since I was a kid. That right there would have made all the difference in the world.
Right, because Keefe, in his confession to you, said that him and Suge locked eyes.
Right.
And he even thought that Suge was dead because
Right.
he saw Suge get hit, grazed in the head.
Right.
So at that point, Vegas PD shows up. Here's the crime scene. Here's Tupac bleeding to death, essentially. Suge shot, car shot up. The Cadillac that just shot up the car was gone. If Suge had said, in that car was Keefe D. For sure. I don't know about anything else, but in that car, I saw Keefe D. What would have happened at that point?
They would have had the probable cause to arrest Keefe D.
Okay.
And that would have changed things, obviously. He'd have been arrested right there. And then other people, if they had been forthright, if we knew what took place over at 662 back at that time, and seeing the white Cadillac coming in, and potentially identifying Orlando Anderson. But once you get Keefe D, and you have him under arrest, that reinforces the relationship with Orlando, and that Orlando now has the motive because he just got in a fight with Tupac, and everything may have changed. They would have been on the hunt. They would have known who to look for, other than just 4 black males in a white Cadillac.
Right, because I remember I interviewed, 2 of the Compton PD guys, Blondie and
Glad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Compton PD was investigating Orlando for a different murder.
Right.
At the time that he got killed.
Right.
And had they actually picked him up for that murder, he might have still be alive.
Right. Right. I think that was Elbert Webb I think that was the murder that they were talking about, I think.
Right, and this is what I've said in a couple of interviews, is that Orlando Anderson was a certified gangster with murders being investigated on him and everything else like that. This was not a wannabe or a hanger-on. This was a guy that was putting in work in Compton. But ultimately, Suge didn't cooperate, and the murder is still unsolved in 2019.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
Did you see the Showtime documentary on Suge Knight?
No, I haven't. The Antoine Fuqua one?
Yeah.
No, I haven't seen that.
Pretty good.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Suge cries at the end. You know, he talks about how he's painted to be the bad guy and he's helped so many people become millionaires and stuff like that. And, you know, there is a certain truth to that part.
Yeah, there's some truth to that, I guess.
When you heard about Suge's 28-year plea deal, did it surprise you at all?
No.
No. So this is just what happens when you're in a situation like Suge with all the bullshit around it.
Right.
Sometime later, after, you know, many years after death row was at its height, you end up having this artist named Tekashi 6ix9ine. You familiar with who he is?
Yeah.
And his label is called TreWay, and the head guy on TreWay, this guy named Shotty, whenever you saw him on video, they would say, TreWay, the new death row.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. Well.
And here you have all these guys ended up getting picked up by the feds. And Tekashi recently pled guilty to 9 charges, from drug distribution to, you know, putting out, you know, there was a hit that went out on somebody to, you know, fentanyl and all types of, you know, all types of really serious charges. When you look at this situation, the whole Tekashi situation, what is your take on it?
That they brought him in, and he knew he was facing a lot of time, and they said, oh, you can mitigate that. Why don't you cooperate with us, make our case easier to prove in court? And so he decides to cooperate, and you know, now we know. You know, we'll see, you know, how it benefits him. But that's, like, again, these are the type of deals that get made all the time.
Right. I remember when we first reported on it, my writer put that he's facing, you know, based on the 9 charges he pled guilty to, that he's facing a minimum of 47 years. And I said, okay, this is clearly a typo. This probably means a maximum of 47 years. And she came back and said, no, I double checked. It's a minimum of 47 years.
Yeah, the feds don't play. And that's also been, it's kind of interesting when you go back and I look at my law enforcement career, and you're always having these, you know, encounters with gangsters, and they always had this, you know, this deep concern that they were going to be federally prosecuted or federally investigated, because they knew that, you know, the standard of proof is lower in federal law, actually. And, you know, when you do get, it's a much more conservative environment. And if you get convicted, you're potentially looking at a lot of time. You know, like that was the feds don't play.
From what I understand about his case is that, you know, because he's not going to be sentenced until like another year from now. And from the way someone explained it to me is that based on the deal that it seems like he signed up for, is that he has to cooperate in any way that they ask to convict everybody else in that situation. And once everyone else has been convicted, then he'll be given his actual time.
Correct.
That's how it works.
Yeah, most likely, because they're not going to let him off. He's going to get sentencing consideration. So once everybody's convicted and they've gone through the whole gamut, whether or not anybody has to go to trial and be, this is one of the things that they want to do. If they can, they want to avoid trial. So if they can build up, you know, these cooperators against each other, it has a huge influence on whether or not I want to go to trial. If I think that my co-conspirator, my, you know, co-defendant is going to take the stand and testify against me, I don't have a chance. So I should just cop out and try to get the, you know, a lesser charge, or I'm sorry, a lesser sentence. So these are all of the games that get played in that prosecutorial environment. And so Tekashi, you know, he realizes the best thing he can do for himself is cooperate. Once the other co-defendants find out Takashi's cooperating, he's going to testify against you, you should probably just cop out too. That's how they mitigate all of this, and nobody has to go to trial and spend money. So that's what we try to accomplish.
Okay, no one wants to go through a trial.
Not if you're likely getting it convicted.
Okay.
Yeah.
When they say he's facing a minimum of 47 years, because he's pleaded guilty to all 9 charges. If he cooperates and does what he's supposed to, you know, what they're expecting him to do, what will that 47 number likely go down to?
Yeah, I don't have any idea.
If you were to just guess,
If I were to guess,
you know, based on everything you know, your knowledge base, and seeing this go down so many times,
right.
if you were to just guess.
Well, if I knew exactly what information he was providing, if it's really, really critical information that's making the case or bringing charges against other people that they didn't have strong enough cases against, that's very valuable. So I could see them giving him a 15, maybe even 20-year sentence reduction.
Reduction.
Right. So maybe 47, the judge says, all right, we'll give you 25 to 30.
So 5 to 10 years, you don't see that?
Again, it's hard to say not knowing what information he provided, how valuable it was.
Right, because they placed him on the scene of multiple crimes. Like you see the rainbow hair and everything else like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, some people, well, his defense is going to claim that he's not a gangster, he's just a rapper, and this whole image was fake in order to sell records, and these other guys were the bad guys, but you know, he's not a Blood, he's not this, he's just simply a rapper with rainbow hair that wants to sell some records and go, you know, do some shows. Does that ever hold water?
Yeah, I mean, it could. You know, obviously that's what his lawyer is going to try to paint him in the best light possible when he's standing before the judge prior to sentencing. You know, you try to humanize him.
Okay.
So that, you know, you try to tug on the judge's heartstrings and say, you know, there's this kid, he got wayward, but, you know, he still had potential. Let's give him a chance at an afterlife.
Yeah. Do you think there's any chance of him walking away with no prison time?
I don't think a guy like that's going to do well in prison, personally. We'll see. But
Why is that?
you know, I don't think he's built for it. I think he played a game that he was never equipped to play.
Yeah.
And it caught up with him. And so, you know, he'll go to federal prison, which, you know, is not like state penitentiary. Typically, it's easier to survive in federal prison than some of our state pens.
Well, he'll be in serious PC as well.
Maybe.
I don't think they'll let this guy into Gen Pop. I don't think so. Because no one wants, you know, the murder of a high-profile inmate like that under their watch. You know, a warden might lose their job over something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, crazy situation.
It is. Yeah. You know, life's decision has consequences. You know.
I recently had Freeway Ricky Ross on the show. He's a regular guest as well. He was one of the biggest drug dealers on the West Coast.
Right.
And he said something very interesting, because his plug, the guy that was, you know, supplying him all of his cocaine, ended up being a government informant, took the stand against him, and got him convicted for life in prison.
Right.
He ultimately ended up finding a loophole and getting out after 20 years. And I asked him, what would you do if this guy who got you life in prison walked in this room right now? He said, absolutely nothing. What would happen if he walked in the room right now?
Oh, nothing.
Nothing.
I have absolutely nothing against him.
Really?
Nah. Wasn't his fault. See, the way I look at it is, first of all, I made the mistake of getting in the drug business. That was my first mistake. My next mistake was I went back into the drug business after I said I quit.
Yeah.
So what he did is he only did what people do in the drug business. They tell. They set you up. And for somebody to go into the drug business and not understand that, which I was in the drug business and didn't understand it, but I came to grips with it.
That's a very mature attitude.
Yeah. you have this whole, during the, the drama that's unfolding around the whole Tekashi, trial and everything else like that, the main guy, Shotty, I guess, addressed the court and said, we don't bend, we don't break, we don't fold. It's TreWay, saying that no one's going to say anything. Well, now one of their main guys is already told. How often do people tell when they get into these serious situations? Is it almost all the time, or is it half the time? How many people really stick to these street codes and actually stand up and sit down and do their time?
Very few. Yeah, very few. The majority of people are going to do what's in their own best interest. You do have your hardcore holdouts like a George Williams.
So George Williams didn't tell anybody.
He's going to just do his time. I mean, he's
which is life.
Which is life.
Okay.
And but contrary to popular belief, snitching's very common, and it happens all the time. And we rely on it in law enforcement, obviously, and we exploit it whenever we can. But more often than not, people under those circumstances are going to do what's in their own best interests. And if they think that cooperating, and most of the time it is in their best interest, they take advantage of it.
90% of the time?
I'd go 75.
Okay, that's actually lower than I thought. But
Yeah, I'd go 75.
75% of the time people told. Because, I recently interviewed Lil D, Daryl Reed. Are you familiar with his story at all?
No.
Daryl Reed was the crack king of Oakland. And he was a millionaire by 18. Mm-hmm. And by 20, he got picked up by the feds. And he got sentenced to 35 years. And he did not cooperate at all. Right. At the point he got locked up, he said that he knew this was coming. He was prepared for the repercussions. They went through his ledgers. He said, I don't know who these people are. He did his 35 years. He ended up doing 28 years, and he got clemency from Obama to get like 3 years off his sentence. Okay. But, to this day, he feels like he did the right thing. Mm-hmm. He feels like not telling, he was offered witness protection, relocation, everything else like that. He turned it all down. Mm-hmm. He actually went and did 28 years.
It was those conversations with my older partners who told me, man, you jump off the porch, you get caught up for whatever you choose to do, you gotta accept the consequences, because if you tell, we gonna kill you. See, that's the cloth I come from up under. I come up under a different cloth. And so I heard guys say to me like, man, how can you do all that time? It wasn't a choice. I didn't have no option. Didn't nobody make me do what I did. I did it because I chose to do it, so I had to accept what came with that,
You hardly ever see that.
Yeah, he's obviously stood by his own ethical convictions and those principles that he thought were important. You start looking at, your life time frame. You're in your 20s, and you know that you can get out when you're 45. You still think that, okay, I can get out and maybe I've got money stashed, whatever. I can do that time. But, if you're a Suge Knight and you're, looking at you're 45, whatever, 50 in bad health, and, you start to face your own mortality, and to think that you would never get out, that you're going to die in prison, that's a different pill to swallow. So all these guys have to take into consideration what's it like for them. It's an individual decision.
And, you mentioned, you'll have some money when you get out. When I interviewed both Little D and Freeway Ricky, they both said that
when you get all that time, you have to trust somebody. You got to let people hold money. You got to let people have your properties in their names. And majority of the guys that you will have a conversation with that did a bunch of those years, throughout those years, family and friends, they gonna spend that money, man. Because they feel like you don't need it though. Like in their mind, they say, all you need is some money to go to the commissary and get on the phone.
Absolutely.
Same thing with you?
Same thing. Identical stories.
Identical, yeah. So all these people that are getting locked up who think that they're their
fortune to be
relatives
there.
and their homies are gonna hold on to that $500,000 in cash and that
And-
property and those cars
And
when
you
you
know
come
what?
out.
And when you doing it, you're thinking like you're gonna accumulate this stuff, and when you come home, you'll have that.
Yeah, but when you came out, you had nothing.
Nothing.
Do you see this type of thing happen?
Yeah. I think it's hard to hold on. That's whoever out there is protecting your money. There's a lot of temptation for them, and
Yeah.
I can see that they'd be like, "Ah, he's locked away for 15 more years, and I'll work this money and make it right at the end." Whatever, who knows? Another great, kind of illustration of that was David Mack, the dirty LAPD cop who robbed the bank for, $750,000.
Yeah.
And went to jail. Money is never recovered. And when he got out, there's always been a presumption that he had that money buried, and made a life for himself with it. I don't know if that's the truth or not,
Yeah.
or whether it got all pilfered away. Who knows?
Yeah, because you never really heard from him again once he got out.
Right.
He's out now, right?
Yeah, he's been out for a long time.
Yep. One of the things that you heard also coming out of the whole Tekashi thing is that he's having to beef up his security, like with his mother. And his daughter's mother has went on video and said that she feels her life is in danger because of his telling,
Right.
on the 9 Trey Bloods. How often do you see witnesses? Obviously he can't. Well, he can't get killed in prison, but or whatever holding facility he's in. But his mother, his daughter, his daughter's mother is still out there. How often do you see the family of witnesses of cooperating? Witnesses get killed or hurt or something of that sort.
Very, very rarely.
Really?
Very rarely. It's not. Street gangs aren't like organized crime. Obviously, in organized crime, you see that type of stuff historically. Street gangs aren't really like that. If you've crossed somebody on the street, their beefs with you directly, and it's just a different way of doing business. But in my experience, as a homicide investigator and dealing with gangs my entire career, it's very rare that they go beyond the personal dispute and extend it or translate it, over to a family member.
How often does the person themselves get killed?
Rarely also. Unless it's a gang, if, these gangs, they involve themselves in an activity that is violent and dangerous. So gang members get killed all the time.
Right, because clearly, if Tekashi was not around, his co-defendants' cases would be a whole lot easier on them.
Right.
You have a person who's at the scene,
Right.
clearly associated, offering all the information
Right.
that he that he's being asked of,
Right.
not holding anything back so he could lessen his own sentence because he's never done any prison time.
But you have to take into consideration also that by doing that, by taking that action, you're now exposing yourself to bigger problems should you be detected. It's not easy, always to either yourself or to conspire to commit murders and not have to, suffer the consequences of doing that. So those are considerations.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe by eliminating Tekashi, we're better off, but at the same time, are we compounding the problems we already have? Should it be discovered we did that?
Right, because clearly, if that happens, they're going to be the chief suspects.
Right.
So now you have a murder on top of all the drug dealing and everything else like that, and the gun charges and everything else like that. Yeah. We'll see what happens. We'll see if they end up taking it to trial.
Yeah.
They'll whether how much Tekashi will get in terms of time himself. It's a crazy story, but I think it's a very important lesson that is being shown to everybody that trying to get involved in all this gang shit just so you could sell a few more albums is clearly not worth it.
And what's kind of surprising to me is that, this lesson's been learned over and over and over, or should have been learned over and over. They look at the history of that particular environment or musical genre and some of the problems that have taken place. I mean, there's been so many rappers that have either been killed or gone to prison, or, you know, it's just it's a culture that's not all that healthy, you know, in respect to those things. You know.
There's been a bunch of high-profile rapper arrests that have happened recently. 21 Savage just got picked up by ICE. You know, he's not a U.S. citizen, and he wasn't here illegally, is what they're saying. They also found a loaded gun in his car. You know, popular rapper named Lil Baby just got arrested for reckless driving. This other rapper named Blueface got arrested for a gun charge. You know, I guess they found a gun when the police showed up over some disturbance. And people are saying that they think it's a conspiracy against rappers right now. That, you know, you have someone like a Trump in office. All these people are clearly against him. You know, they make songs ridiculing him and telling people, you know, not to support him. And I believe that the 21 Savage even made some comments about ICE and immigration recently when he was on some like late night talk show appearance or stuff like that. Based on all your experience in law enforcement, does it become personal sometimes? Does it become like, yeah, we're going to take down all these guys that are kind of flaunting, you know, their various activities?
Yeah, it could. I mean, let's go all the way back to NWA, you know, and they're provoking the police, and
Yeah. They did a song called "Fuck the Police."
Yeah, and so yeah, you're going to get the cops' attentions, and you know, you're creating, you know, a conflict, and I get it. You know, their perceptions are that, you know, cops oftentimes don't do their jobs well. Let's put it that way. And so, but you know, there's going to naturally be some animosity when you're saying "fuck you," and we're like, well, okay, if you're committing crimes, we're going to, you know, whatever, we're going to look into that and take the time to make a project out of you. So it's possible that those things take place. But the whole thing about this current conspiracy about, you know, well, it's a Trump, you know, all you got to do is look at the history of the genre of music and rap music.
Yep.
And you see it's just an ongoing thing where guys are getting themselves into trouble over a variety of things. But it's not a conspiracy by the government. It's like, don't do this behavior and you don't have these problems.
Like I recently interviewed this rapper from Vallejo named Jay Diggs, who was part of Mac Dre's crew. And their crew were all robbing banks at the time. This was like in the 80s in Vallejo. And Vallejo police started to investigate, you know, who they were, and they started to, you know, lock down, you know, like identify who was involved. And so Mac Dre, being associated with these guys, would get harassed a lot, pulled over for no reason, and have his car searched and so forth. So he made a song called "Punk Police," and he started naming the actual police officers in Vallejo that were harassing him by name in the song. It was like "Fuck the Police" taken to the next level.
Gotcha.
So yeah, you've seen this type of thing in hip hop. I mean, I've never heard of that, you know, before. Right. But yeah, I mean, actually doing songs naming actual police officers. And yeah, at the end of the day, I guess people are human. So if you go and kind of poke the other side, you have to expect some level of retaliation.
Yeah, and if you're associating with criminals, expect that the cops are going to pay attention to you. It's just that easy.
Yeah.
You know, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're a criminal or you're engaged in criminal activity, but if you're associating in that environment, then you should expect to be, you know, perceived accordingly.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't make any sense to go and provoke anybody, really, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I don't know, maybe it sells records, it resonates to a certain degree with the urban culture, anti-authority, you know, cops, you know, haven't always done things the way that we should have, and so it's, you know, created some alienation and some resentment. But ultimately, if you're doing the right thing, and you shouldn't have any problems, right?
There's recently some changes in the prison laws. Kim Kardashian met with Trump, and then a bill was passed. Are you familiar with the bill?
No.
Okay. All right. Do you feel that there's inherently problems with the prison system and sentencing and so forth? When you have nonviolent first-time offenders, someone could be selling crack on the corner and end up getting hit with 10, 15 years in certain areas and so forth. The lack of rehabilitation in prisons, the overall animosity that's kind of set up in the prison system between inmates and the guards, that when you go to places like Germany, you don't see that type of thing. As someone who was responsible for sending a lot of people into this system, do you feel that it's broken?
Yeah, I do. It's not a perfect system. There isn't a perfect system. Theoretically there might be, but there's just not a perfect system. It's a very complicated issue.
Yeah.
And there's so many different factors to take into consideration. So I don't know if I'd use the word broken. I'm just saying it's not as good as it probably should be.
Have you ever regretted somebody that you helped prosecute?
No.
Never?
Never.
Well, there you have it.
Yeah. I've never put anybody in jail that didn't put themselves into a situation to go to jail.
Okay. And the years that they ended up getting, you thought was justified?
Yeah, and sometimes, adversely, I remember a kid who killed somebody over at basketball. Killed another kid that was walking home from school, and he wanted the basketball. He got into a fight and shot and killed this guy. A couple of years go by, I'm at jail division, and I see that guy getting booked again. I'm like, he got out in 2.5 years for a murder. And so, there's also the other side of that coin where...
How did he get out for 2.5 years? Was he a minor? Or?
We have a very arbitrary system. There's just a lot of times where one person can get 15 years for the same thing somebody else gets 5 years for, or whatever. It's a very arbitrary system. And that is something that probably needs to be addressed and improved. But I've seen people overly sentenced, and I've seen people under-sentenced.
Yeah. Well, as someone who's never done any prison time, some jail.
Yet.
We're not going to put that in the universe. We're never going to do any prison time. But I have gotten locked up here and there, like suspended licenses and stupid shit. I can say that, based on a lot of people that I interviewed who have done a lot of jail time, a lot of prison time, I really wish that in the future there is more of a rehabilitation aspect of prison, where a person coming out would be in a better place than when they came in. That they come out with an education, with job skills, and not basically turn it into a revolving door.
Right.
That's my point of view.
Yeah, it's a complicated conversation, but I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, Greg Kading, appreciate you coming in and
thanks.
sharing.
Absolutely.
Hopefully some of these cases you worked on will be closed and solved at some point. I think these people have so many fans, and existing family, children, and so forth. At least on the Biggie side, that I think they would like some closure. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and because I don't have any real confidence in the fact that anything will be done, I always try to leave it with the fact that you don't have to always rely on the court systems to give you closure. Or, you can look at the information available, draw conclusions, and then realize that, you can be very confident as to what happened.
Yeah.
And,
I've said this a lot. I knew about Orlando Anderson killing Tupac way before I even started doing interviews. Yeah. I had friends from Compton and, gang-related guys that would just tell me.
Common knowledge.
It was common knowledge. It was the worst kept secret ever. Yeah. and I've done more interviews around the Tupac situation than I think anybody probably on earth in terms of people actually connected and so forth. And every interview I've ever done has always reinforced my original theory that Orlando did it. Right. But there will always be people that say that's bullshit, that it's the government, that it's Suge, that it's the police, that it's whoever, you know. So that's just how it goes.
Just how
Tupac
it
is one
goes.
of those
Can't
figures.
convince everybody.
I will continue to do these types of interviews, and people come up with their own conclusion at the end of the day. Greg, thank you so much for coming in.
Very welcome.
Peace.